exists between biotic and abiotic components is the bottom line for the ecosystems. In simple, we can also define the interplay existing as the flow of energy and materials. See, you would ask me, ma'am, why this, interplay exists? Basically, why this interplay? I have been repeatedly saying that there is an intricate relationship that exists between biotic and abiotic components. So you can ask me that why, this intricate relationship exists. So this interplay or relationship exists for the flow of energy and materials. Materials means nutrients among organisms and the physical environment. So let us understand it ahead better. Right. So see, this typical schematic representation of energy and nutrient movement shows that, how basically energy and nutrients are moving in ecosystems, how they are being, how they are flowing in an ecosystem. Right. So you can clearly see if we talk about sun, you can easily understand the radiant energy coming from the sun is tapped by the producers, which is moved, which is passed on ahead to herbivores. And when herbivores are fed upon by carnivores, this energy, gets transferred to carnivores, and very easily you can, see the energy movement in red. Okay, it has been labeled by red arrows. And when any of the producers or herbivores or carnivore dies off in an ecosystem, this energy automatically gets transferred to the decomposers. Why? Because, basically decomposers are actioning on the dead carcasses, the dead material. And when they are trying to decompose, definitely, the energy gets transferred from dead producers or dead herbivores or dead carnivores to decomposers. Right, and you must understand that there is no further transfer of energy. Okay, so what does that mean? That energy flow is unidirectional. You can easily see that from sun, the radiant energy gets transferred to producers, and the radiant energy tapped by producers further gets transferred to herbivores, which then further gets transferred to carnivores. And if any organism exists at these three trophic levels dies off, it automatically gets transferred to decomposers. Right, so that means it is non-cyclic, it is unidirectional, it is moving in a direction, and it is non-cyclic. It is not coming back to the sun, it is not coming back to the producers. Once it gets transferred, it gets transferred. Okay, so this is the basic rule which you must know, that energy flow in an ecosystem is unidirectional and it is non-cyclic, right? And then we must understand that how this nutrient movement, we just talked about nutrient movement, how it takes place. Okay, so you can see nutrient movement, you can trace the nutrient movement in an ecosystem tracing the black arrows. Okay, so see what happens from producers. These nutrients are taken up by the herbivores, and from herbivores these are taken up by the carnivores. And it is again very clear that when any of the producers, herbivores or carnivores die off, they release the nutrients to the decomposers, right? And from decomposers, basically when they decompose, they replenish the nutrients to the nutrient pool, right? All the nutrients, when after decomposition on actioning by decomposers, they get added on to the nutrient pool in the soil. And we very well understand this nutrient pool existing in the soil feeds upon the producers, right? When they are trying to produce food, they take a lot of micronutrients, macronutrients from the soil. Where do they come from? If we do not add manure, where do they come from? They come from the nutrient pool which is existing in the soil as a part of decomposition. Okay, so when you trace the black arrows, it is very clear that nutrient movement is cyclic in nature. The nutrients, they come back to the system. From producers, they are again, coming back to the soil, and from soil, they are again going back to the producers, right? So energy flow is unidirectional and non-cyclic, whereas nutrient movement is cyclic in ecosystems. Fine, let's move ahead. So, before we move ahead, it is very much important for us to understand the existence of ecosystems. Repeatedly, I have been, saying in a particular abiotic setting, in a particular background, we are trying to understand the relationship between biotic and abiotic components. So basically what I'm trying to convey, right? See, life exists only in a small proportion of Earth's land, water and atmosphere. All of us understand this. So, but we do not understand that how actually these systems, these natural ecosystems exist in our surroundings. And hence I'm explaining this to you. See, at a global level, the life-sustaining part of the land, the sea and the air forms the biosphere. Okay, so here we can say that this biosphere is the sum total of all ecosystems on Earth. And when we are trying to understand at a global level, what sort of relationships are existing between biotic and abiotic components, we say, yes, biosphere is our ecosystem because it is a sum total of all ecosystems, right? So you will appreciate that basically our definition of ecosystem is, bound by the system under study. The purview of our study. What are the boundaries of our study? Right. So if I want to understand that what is happening at a global level, in fact, I must say, if we want to understand what is happening at a global level, we say, we try to study biosphere. So the ecosystem in existence becomes the biosphere, right? Then at a sub-global level, this is divided into biogeographical realms. At a national or state level, this forms biogeographic regions. As we know, in India, we have different biogeographic regions. When we'll be studying unit biodiversity, we will study about these biogeographic regions in detail. You must have heard a lot about, Deccan Plateau, then Trans-Himalayan region, Western Ghats, Eastern Ghats, right? So these are basically different biogeographic regions and these regions, they have been, divided based upon the biogeography of different regions, right? And physiognomy. And based upon that, the different sort of species, they are found in that particular biogeographic region. Then while at an even more local level, each area has several structurally and functionally identifiable ecosystems. When we go to a more local level, see here we were talking about national or state level, right? When we go deeper into the system, supposedly if I say that I want to understand, these relationships existing in. Now, if I go to the deeper level, say, we talk about, say, Corbett National Park. If we want to understand Corbett National Park, probably we want to know what is happening in the Corbett National Park. Okay, and when we go to that particular Corbett National Park, we will see that this at an even more local level, this natural area has several structurally and functionally identifiable ecosystems. What sort of ecosystems we can find in Corbett National Park? We can see different types of forest, we can see grasslands, we can see river catchments. We very well know that Kosi River passes by the Corbett National Park. So river catchments, mangrove swamps we can find in any other natural area, then seashores, islands, etc. So these are different sort of structurally and functionally identifiable ecosystems, right, which are existing. So when we are trying to understand at a more local level, we are trying to understand these typical structurally and functionally identifiable ecosystems, right? So it is important to mention here that a system is basically an arbitrary unit of universe which has been selected for the study. And it is a conceptual construct of human mind to facilitate study of complex ecological systems. See, if we go out and if we say that, yes, I want to understand, the whole earth, the sum total of all ecosystems, what is happening? At a narrow scale, it is not possible. Okay, at a broader scale, we can understand things, but if we want to understand, in minor detail, if we want to go into details, what is happening in a particular ecosystem, we have to choose a local scale. And then what we do, we basically, when we go out for forest studies in a forest, so what basically we do, we lay out different quadrats. Okay, basically I must say a unit of a fixed size. Okay, and that we choose as per our study, and based upon the details which we acquire in the field, by laying those quadrats, we basically extrapolate to the whole forest ecosystem, because practically it is not possible to study the whole forest ecosystem because it is spread in acres of land. So what we do, we spread out different quadrats and we study what is happening in those units. Okay, and then we go into detail, and then we extrapolate, what comes out of going deeper into those quadrats, of those units, study units. We go, we extrapolate that to the whole ecosystem, and we try to understand, okay, this is happening in this particular forest ecosystem. Right. So this system is basically an arbitrary unit. You must understand it, and it is a conceptual construct of human mind, so that we can facilitate the study of complex ecological systems. The ecological systems, we understand, they are very complex in nature. What is happening, it is something abstract. We have to go into deeper details to understand what is actually happening in the system, in the natural system. Right. So when we talk about different examples of the ecosystem, see, they are generally real, I must say, natural ecosystems, such as a pond, a forest, an ocean, or an aquarium. But it may be abstract in the sense of conceptual models developed from knowledge of real systems. See, you must have heard a lot about ecological modeling, right? See, if something is happening in a particular forest ecosystem, say if we studied that, this level of CO2 leads to, range shift of these species in a mountainous ecosystem. The mountainous ecosystems, they are called as montane ecosystems. Okay. So supposedly if we study that, when the CO2 level in this area is rising, this particular species A was found at 1500 kilometers and now it is being found at 1700 kilometers, which is hinting towards the effect of climate change on this particular species, the range of this particular species. Right. So what do we do? Based upon this understanding, we conceptualize. We try to develop models which predict, okay, that in 2030, what might happen if the CO2 level rises to this much? Then what is going to happen to the range of this particular species? In 2050, will that be found at 1700 kilometers, or would scientists be able to trace this species at say 2000 kilometers or say 1500 kilometers? Right. So basically, these are abstract ecosystems wherein we try to conceptualize the models which is developed from the knowledge of real systems. Right. As I highlighted one example before you. And they may be very diverse. They may vary from small to large, from terrestrial to freshwater to marine, or field to laboratory, but they possess certain general structural and functional attributes which can be recognized, analyzed, and predicted. Okay, so whenever we talk about understanding ecosystems, it is again very much important from your examination point of view that whenever you have to define any ecosystem, so these are the basic four key features based upon which you can easily understand ecosystems and can define them. Okay, so the first pointer is that how does an ecosystem look like? ठीक है, ecosystem दिखता कैसा है? An ecosystem can be described by its specific features in relation to its surroundings, which may be either natural or it may be human influenced. Right? Then when you try to explain, okay, this is a natural ecosystem, this is human influence ecosystem, and what sort of relationship it has with its surroundings. So herein you are trying to explain that how does it look like. Then you need to go into details of its structure, that what is its structure. It refers to whether it's a forest, it's a grassland, it's a water body. Basically, what is the structure of the ecosystem? The agricultural area, or it is a grazing area, urban area, etc. The different characteristic features of an ecosystem, they basically define its structure. As a forest has different layers from the ground to the canopy. See, you must have seen forests in real life, and in case you haven't seen forests in real life, you must have seen in different sort of documentaries or movies, right? So you must have, you would appreciate that yes, the forest has different layers from the forest floor, which is called as the ground, and when we move up to the canopy is the topmost story. Okay, when we move to the canopy, you see, there is first story, there is second story, third story, and then top story in a forest. So basically this affects the community composition from one layer to another. Okay, there are certain species of insects which love to stay, in the first story. So they would be found in a first story. Okay, and the more the number of stories, the more complexity exists in the forest, and the community composition also becomes more complex, because you understand that when there are variety of stories and when there are variety of layers existing in the forest, from the ground, from the forest floor to the canopy, basically it provides habitat to n number of species. And when it is able to provide habitat to n number of species, you understand that it basically, as a function, those different species, they support different sort of energy transfer mechanisms, that is food chain and food web. When food chain, food web becomes complex, automatically the community composition becomes quite complex in an ecosystem, right? So further, we also need to understand what is the composition of an ecosystem. What sort of different biotic factors and abiotic factors are found in an ecosystem? What are the different sort of plant, animal communities, microbial communities which are existing in that particular ecosystem under study? And how they're interacting with each other and their surroundings, that is abiotic factors, how they're interacting with rainfall, humidity, or say light. Okay, the light availability, which is natural light availability, etc. This forms an ecosystem. And a few components we understand, they may be abundant, and others they may be rare. Okay, so see, composition, it depends upon the the relationship of biotic factors with abiotic factors. If there is too much of rainfall in an ecosystem, you understand, for example, in a tropical rainforest, you find species which love to grow in I must say ample water conditions. Okay, when we talk about light availability, for example, if we talk about dry deciduous forests, dry deciduous forest is too dry, and you see hardly in a particular season, or most of the for most part of the year, you get to see that hardly the trees have leaves on them. Okay, they support leaves for I must say a part of the year. So what happens, the light availability on the floor automatically becomes high. ओके और जैसे ही लाइट अवेलेबिलिटी बढ़ जाती है, व्हाट हैपेंस, यू विल गेट टू सी मोर ऑफ sun loving species in the ecosystem than shade loving species. Okay, so you can understand that how abiotic factors also drive the composition of an ecosystem. So they are very instrumental in the functioning of an ecosystem. Then how does an ecosystem work? What does the working of an ecosystem mean? The different functions which it performs. What are the different functions? The functions which it performs with the the interactions, through interactions between living and non-living components. That is different biogeochemical cycles. What are these biogeochemical cycles? This oxygen cycle, carbon cycle, sulfur cycle. Okay, water cycle again is important function performed by the ecosystem. The decomposition, photosynthesis, the energy transfer mechanisms in the form of, we just read, in the form of food chains and food webs. Right. So if we explain these 4 different pointers, we will be able to understand the functioning of an ecosystem under study. Fine. Then, for instance, if we take an example of a pond ecosystem to understand in deeper detail, see, a pond is a how you can explain a particular ecosystem. So a pond is a relatively small but a complex ecosystem made up of water, mud, plants, insects, fishes, and all other associated living and non-living components. The pond ecosystem also consists of the interactions between all of these living and non-living components. For example, algae provides nutrients and oxygen to insects and small fishes, right? And then in turn, the insects and small fishes may provide nutrients to larger fishes, birds, and frogs. See, when here I referred to algae, which provides nutrients and oxygen to insects and small fishes, we should not forget the role played by phytoplanktons, okay, which are unicellular plants. So phytoplanktons, these are unicellular in nature, and these phytoplanktons are fed upon by insects, small fishes, etc., but also by zooplanktons, which are again one-celled, unicellular, okay. Then microscopic, sorry, not unicellular, they are microscopic, okay, they are very small, microscopic. Then when the plants and animals die, they become part of the non-living component of the ecosystem, and they feed certain kinds of insects and bacteria that live in the mud. So basically those are decomposers. And anything that enters the pond, such as sunlight, rain, or contaminants, they become part of the pond ecosystem and can affect the organisms and their interaction in the pond. Right. So, in your syllabi, it is very well mentioned that when we will be discussing different ecosystems, it is also important for you to understand different contemporary threats, right? Different sort of threats which are being faced by these ecosystems. So if we talk about pond, we understand, that there are different sort of contemporary threats which are being faced by ponds these days. What are those? What are those? Please put in the chat box, in the question answer box, that what are the different, these different contemporary threats which a pond ecosystem is facing these days. Yeah. Okay. So to name a few, we know that we have been using single-use plastic items like hell, okay, and when we discard the plastic waste in the pond, this again is a very, very important contemporary threat. The agriculture, then what else? Yeah, think about it. Different sort of contaminants. See, when the industrial water or when the sewage, when we discard in the pond knowingly or unknowingly, then that again adds up different sort of contaminants, heavy metals to the pond water and affects the aquatic life, right? The fertilizers or the manures which which reach the pond water through agricultural runoff or through nearby industries again is a serious threat. And then this over exploitation of ponds by the rural people or the people living nearby, and that's why that since we are losing pond ecosystems and natural setups, so these days in urban ecosystems in higher education institutions we are planning up artificial pond ecosystems, right? So that the newer generation, the newer the recent generation gets to know the different roles, functional roles which are played by this small, relatively small but complex ecosystem, which is pond ecosystem. So thus the interaction of energy and materials, that is one-way flow of energy and the circulation of materials, are of primary concern in an ecosystem's structural and functional organization. Right? And here again, I would explain, I would highlight one more thing, that whenever you are talking about any ecosystem, when you are defining it, when you are discussing the different threats which are being faced by the ecosystem, also do mention the examples, the real life examples of the ecosystem. If I talk about forest ecosystem, Or if I talk about pond ecosystem, so you can easily say forest ecosystem example is forest ecosystem, comma, Corbett National Park. Right, because yes, the natural ecosystem, the natural forest exists in the Corbett National Park, and that's why it's a national park. Right? So the real life, don't, it's good that if you give an example of Amazon forest, good that you know about the international scenario, but you must also mention the real life example from the Indian context as well. Right? And when we talk about pond ecosystem, you can easily write pond ecosystem, comma, Corbett National Park, because pond ecosystem exists in a national park. Right? Then if you talk about ocean ecosystem, you can mention Indian Ocean ecosystem. Okay, you can give one example from the national scenario and one from the international scenario. Hope I'm clear. Okay, so moving ahead, it is very much important for us to understand and appreciate the concept of hierarchy in ecosystems. That would basically, help you understand how how basically this interactions are taking place in ecosystems or in the biosphere at large. Okay, and you must have read in your lower grades in school that what is the concept of hierarchy, but then quickly I would recapitulate for you. The ecosystems, they have been organized hierarchically, and these individuals or organisms being the basic unit of study in ecology, they form the base of the hierarchy. So you can easily see that individual here, this is basically showing the hierarchical component. So the individual forms or the organism forms the basic unit of study in ecology, and that's why it's at the base of the hierarchy. Then the species and populations, they form the next order of complexity. See, an individual, belongs to a set of species, and that's why the species, the individual, different individuals of a particular species, they form a population. Okay, living in a particular abiotic setting. So basically that is called as population and forms the next order of complexity. And this is followed by communities in the next order. The communities existing in environments with particular physico-chemical attributes constitute an ecosystem wherein different population of A, B, C, D species, how they are interacting with each other and also with the abiotic factors in a particular how they are also interacting with the physico-chemical attributes in a particular abiotic setting. Okay, and this constitutes an ecosystem, and thus ecosystem forms the basic unit in ecology to study the integrated functions of nature. And that's why you would appreciate why this unit 2 in your syllabi has been referred to as or is centered on the ecosystems. Okay, and these biotic and abiotic components, these are linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flows, as we discussed lately. As ecosystems, they are defined by the network of interactions among and between organisms and their environment. They can come in any size, but usually encompass specific and limited spaces. Right? The aggregation of all ecosystems on Earth is often called as ecosphere, or we can say biosphere. So, the next level of complexity from community to ecosystem, it leads to biome, and which basically subsumes, which basically leads to biosphere, which subsumes the aggregation of all ecosystems on Earth. Okay, was basically the concept of hierarchy, and we try to understand that how biological organization takes place from beginning from species to biosphere. Then if we talk about ecosystem boundary, see, just now we talked about, in a way we talked about ecosystem boundary when we were trying to, set the boundaries of the system of our study. Okay, so see, ecosystem boundary is not a discrete unit. It can be isolated, but it's very well interlinked and integrated with other natural ecosystems. For example, if I say, in a Corbett National Park, there is Kosi River which is passing by. So if I want to understand, that how a forest ecosystem is functioning, near to Kosi River. Although my purview of study is focused on the forest ecosystem, but nowhere I can ignore its interlinkage or its integration, its influence with the components of the Kosi River. Right, we might consider the forest ecosystem as of now existing in the Corbett National Park, neglecting the interactions with the Kosi River ecosystem. Right, so we can decide the discrete unit, we can lay the ecosystem boundary based upon the purview of our study, but nowhere in natural ecosystems they are discrete units. They are interlinked and integrated, so we must appreciate that. Okay, and although the area occupied by these boundaries may be small compared to the total landscape, their role is extremely important as they control flow of organisms, materials, energy, and information. So hope it's clear to you. Okay, so we just lay those boundaries to understand, to highlight the purview of our study, but nowhere, nowhere I must say that they are not integrated. They are always integrated. So again, this ecosystem boundary is a human construct. Okay, for the sake of study. Then we must understand the new energy flow. See, I just talked about this, that how energy flows in an ecosystem, how the energy transfer mechanisms are occurring in an ecosystem in the form of a food chain, and yes, in the form of a food web, right? So food chain is basically a large number of microscopic phytoplanktons and other macrophytes. They perform the primary job of energy fixation. Right, then the primary producers are eaten by herbivores, which are further eaten by carnivores or predators in different ecosystems. And the transfer of energy fixed by plants through a series of organisms eating one and being eaten by the other. This is called as food chain. And whenever you are explaining food chains, you must always give a typical example. You must always, complement your answer with the example of a food chain. And see here clearly I have mentioned that how a typical food chain can be traced in a grassland ecosystem. So primary producers, they are being fed upon by herbivores, which are further fed upon by first order carnivores, that is secondary consumers, then later by tertiary consumers. Okay, this is how the energy flow takes place. And here this is basically a generalized food chain wherein I have highlighted the different trophic levels. And now when we are talking about a grassland ecosystem specifically, we must mention that primary producers are the grasses, primary consumers are grasshoppers, secondary consumers are frogs or say snakes, and tertiary consumers are vultures in a grassland ecosystem. So this becomes your complete example, right? And a well represented answer. Then what is a food web? See, we understand, it is interconnected network of food chains. One organism is not only being eaten by B. A is not only being eaten by B. A is also being eaten by C or D or say E, right? And this, this interconnected network of food chains is called as food web. So the food relations, they are not so simple, rather they are complex. And the trophic relationship between organisms of any ecosystem is not always in a simple chain-like fashion as we discussed, but it forms a complicated network. And this net-like trophic interrelationship is called a food web. Since several species may occur in each of the trophic levels, the organisms that feed on a common set of organisms and are fed on by another common set of organisms are referred to as trophic species. And the analysis of food webs, I must tell you, it is very much important to understand ecosystem dynamics, to understand ecosystem composition and complexity. Okay. Then another important point, which is quite important for you to understand ecosystem dynamics, is ecological pyramids. So see, what are ecological pyramids? Basically, when we try to represent the relationship between numbers, biomass and energy contents of the primary producers and the consumers in any ecosystem. So these relationships, when they are represented in diagrammatic ways, they are referred to as ecological pyramids. Okay, so these ecological pyramids, they are of three categories, namely the pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy or productivity. Ecological pyramid of numbers and biomass, they may be upright pyramidal, inverted pyramidal, or of any other shape. But you must note here that the pyramid of energy is always upright pyramidal or triangle shaped. Why? Because we understand the energy content existing at the level of producers is the maximum, and it keeps on decreasing as we move ahead to other trophic levels. Okay, to the successive trophic levels. So what is pyramid of numbers? Pyramid of numbers is the one in which individuals at each of the successive trophic levels are counted per unit area and their numbers are plotted. Okay, so here you can see this is pyramid of numbers in a grassland ecosystem. We have mentioned what is the number of individuals at. See, basically I just discussed that different quadrats, okay, unit area plots, basically they are, you know, chosen, they are laid in the forest, and what is done per unit area, we try to count, you know, the different organisms which are existing in those plots, okay, and we count them, and then when they are represented in the form of a graph, you get to see the pyramid of numbers. Okay, and this basically gives you an idea, you know, that how, you know, these primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, they are placed in an ecosystem. Okay, pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of biomass is the one in which the total biomass existing at each of the successive trophic levels is measured in terms of dry weight or calorific value per unit area and plotted. Caloric value, sorry, and plotted. Okay, so why only dry weight? See, if we take an example of a mango leaf, or if we take an example of the modified leaf in case of cactus, phyllode, okay, so we very well understand that in case of phyllode, it is maximum water, you know, greater than 90% is water. Okay, so that, you know, if we take the fresh weight of the leaf or the fresh weight of the organism, it might give us misleading value. Okay, and that's why we always consider biomass in terms of dry weight. Okay, so here you can see that this is a pyramid of biomass which has been depicted here in a grassland ecosystem. So again, we do the same, the plots, the quadrats which were laid in the ecosystem. We try to measure the dry weight, the biomass of the plant, animal, you know, or say microbes which are existing, specifically plant and animal biomass. We try to calculate the same, estimate the same, and then we plot it. Okay, and this is how the pyramid of biomass comes up. Say this is example of a grassland ecosystem, and you know, whenever you are drawing pyramids, they should be very well labeled. Okay, and just not a staircase. You should clearly mention the unit of estimation. You should clearly mention which trophic level you are representing. You should also clearly represent which ecosystem type you are talking about. Then what is the pyramid of energy? See, pyramid of energy or productivity is, you know, in which the energy flow per unit time at each of the successive trophic levels is measured and plotted. So here what we do at each trophic level, we try to estimate the energy existing. And the pyramid of energy flow is considered of one of the fundamental significance as it illustrates the actual functional relationships between the trophic levels. Okay, because these are the functional relationships existing between the trophic levels and which is being highlighted upon by the energy pyramid in a grassland ecosystem, for instance. Okay, we can see that, you know, from 10,000 joules it moves to 1,000 joules, 100 joules, 10 joules as per 10% law. And clearly you can see that the level, the pyramid of energy is pyramidal or triangular, is upright pyramidal or triangle shaped. Right, so you must always remember that the pyramid of energy is always upright pyramidal. However, other pyramids can take any other shape. Okay, So being governed by the second law of thermodynamics, energy flow declines from the producer to the successive trophic levels, and consequently the parameter of energy necessarily undertakes a typical upright pyramidal shape as we just discussed, reflecting a stepwise decrease in energy or productivity towards increasing trophic level. However, the shape of the pyramid of energy is not affected by size or rate of metabolism of organisms, while the other two pyramids are affected. Okay, so it is not affected by the size or rate of metabolism. Okay, yes. So it's the time for questions. Let me take your questions, class. Yes. You can, yeah, good afternoon, Shweta. All of you can ask your questions, please. Shivangi, that, the mode of examination, whether it would be online or offline, that would be highlighted upon by School of Open Learning on their website. So please stay in touch. Attendance again, Priya, that would be taken care by School of Open Learning, and they are keeping a record of your attendance. So you need not worry about it. You just come to the class. Tushti, yes, this is your compulsory course on environmental studies. You must have seen that, this ability enhancement compulsory course, AECC. It is there in your curricula, and herein you are studying environmental studies as an AECC course. Okay. Good, Salonika, very good. Water bodies, microbes, atmosphere, good. Yeah, Sadia, you won't be able to unmute yourself, but so that we can have maximum of discussion here in the class. But you can easily write in the box in this question answer box, and each time we will discuss at the end of our class. Okay. Okay, good, Shweta, that you mentioned that biotic components and abiotic components, they interact with each other in an ecosystem. Good.